In this example, I'm going to go through a scenario where we found additional redundant connections in aOLAP appear to add an overhead to the report's runtime. A connection will be established with each tab within the analysis workspace. So even if a tab is subsequently closed, we noted that the connection remains alive and listed in the workspace. And the more connections we had, we noticed a gradual slowdown in performance. So I've traced here a workflow with no redundant connections, and I've also traced a workflow with one connection which was generated with the addition of a new tab, but then we closed the tab. So we've now got one redundant connection on top of what we had before. This file here I'm looking at is the output from the end-to-end client plugin trace tool. It generates a file called businesstransaction.xml, most of which I'm not interested in. However, this is a tag which gets added to every transaction logged into the trace files. So now I can open my trace files and I can filter and only look at the stuff which is generated by my workflows. So I've already done that on the first set of trace files, and let me show you that on the second set of trace files. So if I now open my second set of trace files, I'm going to merge everything together. So rather than having 5 files now, I've only got one view. I'm going to filter for everything which was part of my transaction. Now you'll see it's all merged together, and I'm also going to enable the indent text according to scope, which makes it a little easier on the eye. Now the first thing to note is, in the first workflow, everything's happening inside a Tomcat wrapper, an HTTP servlet request. And the HTTP servlet request in the first workflow took about 43 seconds. In the second workflow, which remember is exactly the same except for this additional redundant connection, I'm now seeing 52 seconds. So there's quite a substantial slowdown here. So what I'm going to do is try and drill into this and find out where it's coming from. This log file reader actually allows for some quite helpful analysis by looking at the time column down here. Now you'll see that most of these times are like quite literally a fraction of a second between each other. However, if there were a gap between this one and this one, that would be listed as a spike in the delay visualizer. So you'll see a couple of spikes here in my first workflow. Spikes are to be expected. That's just when something's happening, probably outside the trace files. Perhaps it's going to speak to BW, that's or a long-running function call. Spikes are okay, but I just want to see what they are to see if I can match them up to my second workflow. So if you look at the timestamp box down the bottom, I'm going to scroll across and you'll see the time moving. This first spike here, if you look at the timestamp box, it will jump from 23 seconds-ish up to 35 seconds, so there's quite a big spike there. I can press the scroll to it button, and that will take me to whatever that spike was. So in this case, commit parameter transactions. Now I've turned on the formatting, so I'm looking now for the innermost box to finish. There it goes. Innermost box took 29 and a bit seconds. There you go, 29 and a bit seconds, that's the wrapper for that inner box as well. Let's see if I can match that up to a corresponding spike in my second workflow. Now remember, these workflows are the same, except for this additional connection overhead. So already I can see several spikes here which I wouldn't have expected. Well, in fact, perhaps I should expect it because I'm looking for a problem. But let's see if I can marry them up to what was in my workflow and see what the difference is. So again, I'm looking at the timestamp box down the bottom. As I drag the slider across, it's going from 41 seconds, 41 seconds, 41 seconds, and then 56. So that's quite a big jump. Let's have a look at what caused that spike. And perhaps unsurprisingly, it's doing the same thing. So I'm looking at a commit parameter transaction. I'm looking at the inner box if I'm using the formatting as a guide. And there we are. In fact, it's about the same time, if anything, a little bit faster in this one here. So I'm happy that those spikes are the same. It's a commit parameter transaction and a commit parameter transaction here. So far so good. But as you'll remember, there were fewer spikes in the first workflow. So let's have a look at the second spike in my first workflow. This is what I would consider to be a normal, good workflow, perhaps. I say that because in the redundant connection workflow, the connection is literally redundant. It has no meaning within inside the workspace. It doesn't do anything, but apparently aOLAP is still using it for something. We need to find out what it is. So let's have a quick look here. I'm looking at the timestamp box down the bottom, down here, looking for a jump. So I can fine tune and fine scroll on this, using this at the end. I can see it's starting to do stuff here. So let's jump in where it starts to kick off and see what we can see. So I can see 7 seconds there of something happening. That is a get representation call, which I happen to know means go and fetch me some data. So okay, we've committed the parameters, and now we've gone to get the data. So how does that compare to our second workflow? Okay, now I had more spikes in here. First one was a commit parameter transaction. I would expect there must be a get representation call, and I would expect it has to be one of these other spikes. But what are these two spikes? So again, I'm using the timer at the bottom to see when this all starts to happen. And I've gone from 11 seconds there up to 17 seconds. There we go. So I'm going to jump to that point in the trace files and I can see a commit parameter transaction again. I'm pretty sure we've already done one of those. That was the first spike. Okay, so it would appear that I've not yet done my get representation. I've not yet got any data. Let's just confirm that if I can by using the scroller again. Okay, so if I scroll across to the other spike at the end, what do I see here? Looking at the timestamp box, okay, I'm in the middle of something there. It went from 22 seconds to 29 seconds. Let's have a look at that in the trace file, and where is that spike? Here we go. I can see something there which took me 7 seconds. So it would appear a little over 7 seconds there as well. So in fact, I've got my get representation in both workflows, which I would expect. I've got a commit parameter transaction in both workflows, which I would expect. It looks like I've got an additional commit parameter transaction in the second longer workflow. I've only refreshed the report once. I've used the same parameters each time, so it looks like the additional unused connection is actually being used to submit parameters again, even though it's not being used in my report.